I call the meeting of the Land Use Working Group, the Public Safety Subcommittee, to order. It's Friday, October 31st at 9 a.m. All three members of the subgroup, Judith Long, Mark Martinez, and Sven Weber, are present. First item on the agenda is the approval of the August 22nd minutes. I just sent this around as a PDF. Please have a look if there's any comments on that.
They look good to me, so I move. We accept the minutes. We approve the minutes.
Okay, second.
Second.
All in favor, and make a roll call. Mark,
Aye.
Judith,
Aye.
Sven, aye. So he was approved. Okay. The next agenda item is identifying preliminary set of options and evaluation criteria. Is this where you prepared some slides, or Judith, or
Yes.
So you want to take that on?
Yeah, and I would just emphasize, and good morning, Megan, Brian, and Megan, who have joined us. Linda, Brian, and Megan, who have joined us. And by the way, Mark, I'm now going to note that it's an option to say no to being chair of a meeting. So I'm going to put in that little note in the brain for next time. All right, so let me just share screen. Just to note that I literally have put these together based on our prior conversations, but they are in no specific order. Well, they're in an order of increment of complexity, but they're not intended to suggest any particular preference for one or the other. It's really just starting to get a sense of what we have. So let me get this going. Got that out of the way. That one. I want screen 2. Where is screen 2? Give me 1 second. Yeah, there it is. Okay. All right. Can you guys see this? Now I realize that the font might be a little bit small. Is that the wrong screen? Yeah, it's the wrong screen.
I have a big screen. That helps.
Yeah. I am sharing the wrong screen. Hang on. Stop share.
Oops.
No, I'm trying to get the matrix in front of you.
Okay.
That's the one I want. There we go. Hang on. Just getting my screen set up here. All right, so do you guys see something that looks like a matrix in front of you?
I see something that says options, scope, pros, cons.
Perfect. Yeah. Sorry. Yes, that's just a list of options. So let me just run through with you very quickly what I have. So I have this list of options that I've assembled from what we've discussed. I have a couple sets of evaluation criteria that we've discussed in general, but we can go through them one by one. I have a sample evaluation matrix and what that looks like and what are some scoring mechanisms. And then finally, I have a little bit of benchmarking data on fire station costs from recent projects, largely in New England. And I was able to pick up a number of recent projects that are in Massachusetts and comparable. So I'm going to get to those somewhat in order. Okay, now I need to be able to make this big enough that you guys can actually see it. So can you tell me, is that readable?
It's okay for me.
Yeah, I'm going to do from current slides, see if that, yeah.
That's okay. That's good.
Okay. All right. So let's run down the options side first. And you can see that with all the groups, we're starting with what is a status quo option. So in this case, the status quo is simply doing maintenance and essential repairs, sort of doing exactly what we've been doing at that site for the last it just fine. My computer's running a little slow and it just
fine. Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So status quo, maintenance and essential repairs only. The second option is to renovate both. So this is where we would do substantial upgrades to both the Walden Street campus and the West Concord Fire Station. The third option is, for lack of a better name, a hybrid, because it involves renovating one and building new at the other site. So renovating the Walden Street campus, and then building a new West Concord fire station. And then 3A and 3B, the difference there is that 3A discusses building the new West Concord fire station on its existing site. And the second version, the B version, discusses if we were to build a new West Concord fire station on a new site. And then, Mark, I see your hands raised, but let's just walk through, just walk through these, and then we can come back to questions. Number 4 would be building all new. I mean, I know that sounds probably excessive relative to our needs upon immediate review, but we should consider all of the different options. So if we were to sell the Walden Street complex, sell the West Concord fire station site and build a new fire station / police station in Concord Center, some combination in West Concord. And by the way, in that category, there's a possibility to also separate the police station and build a new police station in a different location, right? Again, that sounds like the most complicated of the different possible options, and it probably is, but it should at least be in the mix until we decide that that's not the way to go. And then number 5 is to build a central campus. So to build one big, giant combination fire station, police station, emergency services, animal control, et cetera. And I mean, very quickly, the obvious reaction to that is there a site that would be so central that would allow us to meet all of the necessary response time requirements? And the answer is, we don't know, but let's at least throw it into the mix because there would be some building efficiencies with co-location. So those are kind of the categories and ideas that I think we've discussed. I've put another, obviously there are other ideas that folks might have. So we can extend this list. We can refine in category 4 exactly what that means. But I think that captures the basic idea of what the possible options are. So, yeah. Is that helpful, Sven? I hope that's helpful. This was me at 2 o'clock in the morning doing this. So
Yeah, Mark
I think
had a
that's helpful.
question. Let him go first.
Judith, I think this is great. And one of the questions, I guess, and it falls on Brian and his counterpart at the fire, is, at some point there needs to be a pitch to citizens / voters. And when we go through the options, do you get the same bang for your buck, if you will? And my issue is, the town is not going to be excited about getting more bills in the coming years for police, fire, and public works. So it's incumbent upon the police and the fire leaders to explain what the impediments are. So on the police side, it could be, we're not training as much as we need to. There are more burglaries. There's more vandalism. On the fire side, it could be we don't have the right training. We're not responding to people's emergencies. There could be a casualty. So I think this is great. I think it's great to lay out the options. I'm just wondering if when we sort of put in the context of how spending money provides better services, thereby incentivizing and possibly forcing citizens to vote for this spending.
But wouldn't these arguments fall out of our evaluation when we go through this and say these are, if you look through the options, compare that to the needs that fire and police gave us and continue hopefully to give us feedback on our evaluation, and then we see what the arguments for and against a certain option is, and then we have to inform the public. So just a little background, we just had the report, the first quarter report to the select board on Monday, and we were very careful not to jump on just communicating what options might be favored options, because the moment you do that in this town, everyone starts to second guesses what are the pros and cons and starts doing stuff. So I'm just more thinking it's better to have the metrics together with the pro and cons and then build a communication plan and see how we can get that, and also build a plan and how we get input from the public in a more active way once these are mapped out. And we're close, I think. We're damn close here.
Sven, I think I totally agree with that. And I guess the only thing is, I guess I had a little bit of a hope that with Brian and maybe his counterpart on the fire side, we could, just among us folks, if you will, understand, again, sort of the bang for the buck, the cost and effect here.
Yeah. No, that needs to be in conjunction, definitely. If fire and police chiefs are saying no way this will work, I think it's harder to sell, to put dollars somewhere. Or definitely this needs all the input of both sides here. So very important to have, similar to the other working groups. The public works side needs to have the backing of the public works, and the municipal consolidation needs to have the backing of all the town staff, that they feel that this is the way to go. Nick, you raised the hand. Can he? I think he can't unmute himself.
Yeah, I should have made you co-host as well, Sven, because I'm running a slideshow. I've got
Okay, can you make me co-host, and then I can?
I think you are co-host. All the members on the subcommittee are co-hosts, and both Brian Whitney and Brian Goldsman are. Who's trying to unmute?
Okay.
Here he is.
Yeah, okay, I can't do my video, but I can talk. There's comments on what you're saying. I think the most important thing is first to identify what the dollar costs are of the status quo. So for instance, the need to buy custom equipment over 20 years is probably a very significant expense. There are probably others like that. The second category is failure to achieve the mission. So if, for instance, you can't buy decontamination equipment for one of the facilities because there's no space to put it, that's a very significant failure to achieve the mission. And if you're hurt by, I don't know what else. Well, I don't know what the standards are that police and fire departments are held to by outside agencies, but I think you have to understand those in some detail. Those are explainable to the citizens. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Good points. I think we have to make sure that in the metrics we have these things. I like that failure to accomplish a mission part. That is important, and I think that's one of the biggest concerns on the status quo, besides buying custom equipment and having only one guy being able to park a truck on the West Concord fire station.
Sven, I wasn't sure if Brian Goldman was wanting to make a comment. Brian,
I will always happy to talk. Trust me. Question of how much time we have. So this is, Brian and I are both kind of the seasoned, grizzled veterans of being around both our professions for years. And, Walden Street, that facility, short of a complete tear down, and I just don't think there's a big enough footprint to even do that. I don't think it's going to solve any problems for either one of us. I mean, they need bigger garage bays. We need more space. We're currently dealing now with a cell block issue because we just had the state inspectors out. In theory, our cell blocks should all be redone anyhow, but it's just that building, its life expectancy is completely over. I think it's safe to say that, and it's just a question of, We'll last, but how much longer can we really last? We just keep patching everything as far as we go. The other part of it is, I've heard it thrown around both ways. There's a huge part of me, I like Natick's setup where, everybody's right there, but given limitations in Concord, to have the police and fire split up on some level, I don't think is a bad idea. I think it might work better in terms of finding land that can be used. Um, but having said that, I don't think any of us are opposed to it either way. We just want to make sure, there's room to grow and it's a big enough facility.
And if I have a couple thoughts, if it's appropriate.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, first I'll have to double check with Shannon. But some of the info I think you were looking for about, current condition and, typical, considerations with a new fire station and, impacts of the current stations on, both apparatus purchasing, supply space, storage space, maintenance needs, all that stuff. I did have a draft. I thought I sent it to Shannon. If I didn't, I apologize, and I'll work with Shannon to get it out to her today. But it's just a, quick, from one of our previous meetings, a quick overview of some of the questions that were asked and some of the, kind of a bullet pointed list of items. Yeah, just to add to Brian's item, the station is definitely getting over. We are growing it. One example I can give you that's come up storage space wise for us that we just made the decision as we go to ALS is we're actually making some space in the back of one of the garage bays here on Walden Street to buy a shed, to put a shed in the back so we can store our ALS supplies. And it's something we can work, we can work and, we're going to make it work. Happy to do that like we do with everything. But that's just, another example of just the outgrowth of the station. There's, supply storage needs, office storage needs, apparatus needs, that type of stuff.
It just,
oh, go ahead.
go ahead. No, continue.
I was going to say, and then as Brian also said too, I think we've mentioned it before, police and fire, we have a great relationship here in Concord. I think a lot of places might tell you it's better than most. We are very happy to be in the same building and work everywhere from admin level through rank and file. But if it made sense for separation, for costs, for space, for those things, we both believe it wouldn't impact any public safety operations with us. So we don't need to be in the same building for us to perform our core functional duties. We can be in different buildings. It's nice if we're in the same building. It's very convenient. We have meetings, we can walk back and forth, but the bulk of the stuff that would be more of an inconvenience, I think, it'd be more at the admin level with us as we meet with the counterparts on the other side. We'd just have to go to a different building or do a Zoom meeting. It really wouldn't affect the core mission. So I think that option is very feasible. And then lastly, as Judith mentioned, is from our perspective on the fire side, we're open to obviously whatever we can give you our thoughts and what we project out as reasonable needs. But we definitely this response time is a core concern of ours. And I think a single station, different locations, all those things, I really believe in conjunction with our great GIS department, maybe a comprehensive evaluation on that. I'd recommend that so that we could take our current data, our current responses, we can project what those will be going out 5 years, maybe even 10 years, and just make sure we get confirm some of the thoughts we have. That one station, we might not be able to, we might lose some response time benchmarks if we come out of one station, or we may find out we're wrong, and one station is a very feasible option. But I think my recommendation or thought would be anything that involves this substantial cost. I think that a response time and a location study would be very beneficial for confirming that before committing, if it happens, this type of money to new buildings.
Yeah, I think it's so. At the moment, we are in a kind of option phase, so identifying the different options. Again, it doesn't mean is that just because the central campus is on this list, we would after looking at it and going through the metrics, who knows what's there, but we might throw this in the trash can right away. So before we put a lot of money on making a response study on that, we have to be sure that this is really on as an option we want to evaluate. Yeah, at the moment it's the creativity phase and saying, what are the ideas? Is there another idea here? Then one thing definitely to bring, which is good. Everything you get right now, if you have an inspection or you get stuff or on these different buildings, it's good for us as this group to know. Yeah. So if you get a disastrous review from the state level on something, we should know because that influences how we look at these things. So the more information we have from both sides, from the fire and from the police side, it help us being informed. Yeah. So for us, it would be bad to have surprises. We do our work and then you say, well, we had 6 weeks ago this information and so on. So help us to make the recommendation. Yeah. And the more information we get, the better. And one thing before then go to Mark and Judith in that order, I think is two things actually that means is, so A is if we look at option 3A and 3B, I think the thinking there is to have they more or less to the West Concord side to the main side, make it significantly larger, potentially by acquiring neighboring lots. And we have to figure out what that means. So that would be then the main station and would give you a lot of additional room and have the station on Walden as the smaller fire station. Yeah. So that if you look at that, it's not just doing a small station in West Concord and keep the current on Walden and you still struggle with the site. So that I think that's the thinking behind it. And then for us, for this group, with respect to studies, what I hear here, definitely everything on option 4, which would elevate this is for option 4, we so to compare option 1 to 3 versus option 4, we need to know is there any structural or any kind of major issues on the existing Walden Street building that prevents us from doing option 1 to 3 in totality. So that's similar to the discussion we have on the Peabody building, where we say, is this just not working at all? We would put too much dollars into renovating or trying to make this structurally work versus rebuilding. So I think we have kind of the Peabody equivalent on our working group is the Walden Street building for fire and police. Go ahead, Mark. You were next.
Brian Whitney, what as a follow-up, how do you view or do you view sort of Concord and West Concord differently, potentially separately? And I guess what I'm referring to is, the future growth that we see with MCI, 40Bs, multifamily housing being built and will be built. Do you think in terms of just response time, or do you think of capacity, or how do you think of it? Because I suspect that the way the town is sort of growing, the West Concord facility actually probably, is higher capacity, higher demand, higher service, or is that not the way to think about it?
No, I think that's very accurate to think about it. I think, and as an example, as run volume grew because of growth in West Concord, for example, we added an ambulance crew in West Concord. So in the last, 50 whatever years it would have been, our growth in staffing to address call volume was in West Concord, and we would predict that that's going to continue. The bulk of the growth seems to be happening in West Concord. And again, that's a combination of not only just growth, but the type of growth. So if it's an elderly population, for us, equal numbers of growth, depending on the demographics, could result in higher call volume, for example. So any like Rivercrest is looking to expand, Newburyport, I should say, is looking to expand. So yeah, definitely, I think it's very important to look at West Concord not only as the current station really is insufficient for apparatus. We have to special apparatus, fire trucks and ambulances up there. But you are right. I think that should be looked at as what's the future growth potential in that building, if that's renovated, or especially if it's a new building, to address potential future growth down the road as well. I could see, if growth continues and our run numbers continue, and that's where the bulk of the runs are, I think we'd want to have options for reevaluating current staffing assignments. Maybe that you need to shift one or two more up into West Concord as opposed to Concord, or if there were staffing increases, if it were to happen in West Concord, make sure that the potential was there to accommodate that if it happens down the road.
Brian, just a quick follow-up. So when do you do that analysis? In other words, from a planning perspective, MCI's, I don't know, 3, 5, maybe even further, 10 years down the road, probably not 10, but you do see the growth. And at what point do you start making those determinations to say, we really need to start shifting our hiring and our staffing and our apparatus? Because I don't think, are you there now, or sort of are you just seeing that trend and that's where you're thinking going forward? And
I don't think we're there now, but I think we, on an annual basis, when we do our reporting, our stats for town reports and town meeting, that's when we take a look at, our run responses and compare them to previous years. I'd say it is looked at annually when we develop that data for the town. And then we also look at a couple metrics like use of mutual aid response times. Those couple key things along those lines. If they indicate that if response times are increasing, we have to look and see, is it because we're busy on multiple calls and we're relying more on mutual aid, and that's in conjunction with mutual aid as well. If we're relying more on mutual aid, it means the call volume's increasing to the point that we can no longer handle what would be, your let's say day-to-day type of emergencies. We rely on mutual aid for any significant incident in the area. So I'm not speaking to major fires, incidents, hazmats, whatever. All of the communities in the area have a strong mutual aid network for that. But as happened 10-ish years ago, when the mutual aid became a reliance for our day-to-day runs, and it happened with us about 10 or 15 years ago for EMS runs. That's when we look at it, and then we looked at the reasons for the runs. We'll look at would it be an aberration for the run volume, or is it something like it was at that time due to growth? And the growth happened, and we project that those runs will remain consistent, and that's how we do our forecasting.
So before I hand it over to Judith, I would like to bring it at a certain point back to what the purpose of this chart is, to think about, are there other options here to consider? I think it would be a good idea for us to summarize, perhaps for the next meeting, our working assumptions. And for example, one working assumption would be that we assume there will be significant increased demand for public safety in West Concord due to the 40Bs, MCI, and so on. So we have to look at these timelines, even though MCI might need 10 years, but it might take us 8 years to get all of this done. And then we are we have below the dimensions that are needed. So I think if for the next time we have something where we say, what are working assumptions we take into account, and then we only reopen these working assumptions if we seriously question these things. So Judith, you had your hand up.
I think the points I was going to make have been raised, Sven. So we can turn to the agenda. Thank you. So
let's look at the options again. It's always let's not judge them at the moment. But other ideas is theirs. I have one other idea that sits between the 3B and 4 option, which would be, again, there is this lot on Walden where right now the pump station is on. that if you're on Walden with the back to the courthouse, it sits on the other side of the street to the left, and that's, I think it is 6 acres or something like that. And Alan Cascade had indicated that they would feel comfortable that this lot could be partially used. So what could be an option there is to say between 3B and 4 is building a new West Concord main fire station in West Concord, building a smaller or a building of a police station on that lot on Walden, across from the courthouse, and again renovate whatever the Walden is for the remainder of fire. That would give us 3 things, but we might have kind of a smaller building for police, and we have to see what is needed there, what kind of footprint would be needed. So just thinking about that
I think that falls into category 4, Sven, I would say, because now you're building new buildings for everything.
Yeah, but not now. Yeah, but you're not. But then it would be 4A and 4B or so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are other variations in 4, but
okay, that would be possible. Separate police station on that separate lot. Okay, all right. Yeah, I get it.
Oh, are you saying we'd still hang on to Walden in this scenario?
Yeah.
So we'd keep Walden and I see. So you do
Then you don't build.
Oh, I understand. I didn't understand fully. Now I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other ideas what we should put on here?
I think we'd also take ideas as to sites that people might have thought, even if it already falls within these options. Are there interesting locations that we might not have thought of?
What if Ripley is freed up? Is this a location or a building we could use?
My sense is that's too far. If it was going to be a fire station in particular, I think that's too far removed from Concord Center. But that would be my initial thing. And by the way, there are plenty of studies that we can do and plenty of firms that can do response time analyses. As I'm sure, Brian know, B2, we'll call you B2. So we can certainly get that done, but I think the cost of those studies is a function of the number of options that you give them to review. And so we'd like to get our options down so that we can be as cost efficient as possible.
Sven, have we not included Kai's Road as a possible site for both maybe a combination of a new fire and new police?
We have not yet the municipal, no, which one? No, we have not yet. I think right now on the public works side, the assumption is that if we free up Kai's, that would be zoned for residential and made available for that. And I think this is where also the negotiations with DCAM would go, because if it would be kind of a housing swap scenario. But we could put it on the list.
And I guess my question with that parcel is, although it's, I think stated at 12 to 13 acres, the reality is with seasonal flooding and then, once a decade flooding, what's the real number? Is it really 8 acres, 7 acres of buildable, if you will?
Well, I think actually there are lots of decking alternatives, Mark, that are going to make make the developable area on that site fairly close to 80 or 90% what it might be otherwise. So there are engineering solutions to building on that site that are not going to constrain sort of the market viability and residential use.
And that we will, I think, talk about it in the larger group. we got indications generally of what this would say, what the town would achieve on this lot if it would be sold to developer. And the real estate people, I think, were very excited about that lot and didn't had a major issue with the flooding. They were comfortable dealing with it. So that was not flagged as a concern from the real estate people so far on that side. But again, it's an option. We should not poo-poo option to say if it's not suitable for, or the town makes a decision, it doesn't go to residential. Could we move fire and police or one of the functions there?
Yeah, because we'd actually, like, when I was chit-chatting, when Brian Goldman and I were just chit-chatting, one idea, and maybe this is what Mark is thinking, is that, well, maybe the fire stations don't go there because they're bigger footprint, but it could be conceivable that there would be a police presence on that site somewhere, right? So if we're thinking creatively, because the police station doesn't necessarily need to be one story either, right? So it doesn't need to have the same footprint. So that could be a possibility if we were looking in scenario 4 and trying to be creative about what that might look like. So while it might be less suitable for fire, because fire also has impacts with regard to noise and 24-hour usage that might not necessarily be compatible with what will likely be higher end market residential. But I think the police station has less of those kinds of immediate impacts, so that might be a better fit. So I don't know if that's what you were thinking of, Mark, but I think that we can certainly be creative in that way on Kai's.
You know, I would agree with that, Judith. Judith, have we gotten any update on, did the land that was previously, the Concord oil land, did that trade? Did that sell?
No, it did not sell. That
Okay.
was failed. Brian Goldman has its hand up here.
A question from an engineering standpoint, what about Concord ice? Is there anything that can be done to elevate that area, to put something on that site?
Concord Ice, sorry.
It's right next door to where the PD is. It's in between the PD, the court, and then that little subdivision of houses there. It sits back. I know there's a lot of farmland and there's a lot of open land there, but I also know it's within the floodplain and conservation
And
area.
isn't there also a lot of conservation land? I had the sense there was the conservation land went way into this, but we can check on the GIS on that.
Yeah, I don't know that site very
so
well.
let's put that on the list
We'll look at it. Yeah.
of lots for the scenario B in the end.
So Brian,
Because that's what we're doing right now. We're saying is what are the lots for scenario B.
And then the other thing, real quick, talking about projections and studies, back in 2010, maybe 9, when Nathan Pratt went in, there were projections done on how it was going to impact public safety back then. So Sven, to your point, is MCI Concord goes in and other lots go in. We start looking at numbers for that, and someone will obviously be doing some sort of analysis to determine what the impact is going to be in terms of the population growth, traffic growth, and all that. We did it once before, and there were recommendations that came out of that, some of which got implemented, some of which didn't.
So a quick question too, and I think it's most likely more on the fire side because they do the emergency stuff, is we also have an aging population, and with the development over there at Newbury Court, there will be more kind of elderly residents in that corner of West Concord. Is that easier to be reached from West Concord or from Main Concord, from Walden?
You're talking the Newbury Court,
Yeah,
definitely West Concord. That's a much shorter.
Much easier. Okay, so we have to, in the West Concord capacity, we have to mentally put that in that bucket. Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other scenarios? I think it's just try to get through this slide here. If not, we can always add more later. If we suddenly have a good night of sleep, have our morning shower, and have a great idea. Okay, Judy, you want to guide us then to the next level of what you want to do with your slides?
Yeah. So, I mean, the other thing about the table is, again, very much first pass, and we don't really want to get into analysis yet. But the understanding the scope and the cost and the timing is going to be something that we think about as well. And one of the modes of analysis is to think about the investment relative to the additional lifespan, and we can measure that across, single buildings and multiple buildings and so forth. So these are metrics, are simple metrics that we can relatively easily develop. Okay, this might be, how hard is this to see, guys?
Good, it's good.
Oh, is it? Okay. So I've got, I mean, I was just playing around with sort of, in my world, we have sets of evaluation criteria that cover all kinds of things. And so I just tried to go through and pluck out the ones that I thought were relevant to public safety. So I think this is the first slide, the second slide. So I have 7 categories. And this is, again, very much first pass. And we're not, we're sort of not going to be super clinical about this, but these are things to think about. So obviously financial considerations in terms of capital, operation, funding sources, this is where we start to think about, fiscal impact, cost, benefit, and lifespan I was just referring to. Project delivery. So one of the things that we haven't talked about a lot in any of our subgroups yet, but we will start talking about when we come together again in January, is timing implications and phasing implications, particularly if we're talking about new sites. And then we have to do site review, we have to do land acquisition. There's sort of a lot of legal things to take care of that may affect the ability to actually effectively implement one of these scenarios. So that's important. Operational effectiveness, obviously that's paramount. So thinking about response times, or do we have functional spaces? Are our staff well and comfortable and able to carry out their jobs? Code compliance, do we have some kind of future proofing in any of the scenarios where we're not putting ourselves into such a tight site or a tight building envelope that we can't 20 years from now, that we're hamstrung by the choices that we're making. So just thinking about some of that flexibility. Site and location attributes. So obviously making sure that they're accessible, they work within the transportation system, compatibility with neighboring uses, environmental resilience, which also comes into the sustainability category. We haven't done much in category 5 in terms of stakeholder and community. Well, we're doing stakeholder work because we're talking to obviously the fire and the police and the emergency services staff and so forth. But we haven't really done much in the way of talking to the community. And I think that's something that we want to start being strategic about in the overall land use working group. But also, I think as Mark is always very good about reminding us that we have to be able to make a case to the community. So we need to be thinking about how we're going to communicate that. Obviously, sustainability and innovation. Sustainability is on the, sort of climate resilience, energy efficiency side, but then also innovation. I mean, we are living in a moment in time where AI is just one example, is changing not only human resource needs, but it's also changing ways that we think about building design and so forth. We've got changes happening in sort of combustion engines and so forth. Is that going to play a role in the future? So thinking about innovation. And then finally, just risk management, just sort of really thinking about the risk profile of each of these different options. And I think to me, that's a pretty decent level of granularity for a 1-year review, because we're not necessarily going to be doing in our group the kind of deeper analysis once we get to an option. You know what I mean? Like our job is to say, okay, here's a bunch of options. We think these ones make more sense than others. But if we wanted to get to the next level of choosing options, we actually do need to hire some people and do response time studies and so forth. So I think this is a level of granularity that the committee could actually reasonably, get to and discuss. And then, I mean, this is, most of you have seen something like this, right? Is to take the evaluation criteria and then run it across the different options. And obviously our list would grow depending on new ideas. And then you can either score them, 1 out of 5 kind of thing, or you can rank them and do an ordinal ranking across and then use that to identify what you think are the better options or the worst options. In this one, we're bowling. In this one, we're golfing, right? Ball, just to help understand the scoring mechanism. So, that's just a way of helping us begin to.
So how do you imagine we are getting from, let's assume we have the options right now, yeah, and there's no major significant new one. How do you imagine we get from where we are now, knowing the list of criteria, to get to a point where we feel comfortable throwing these points out on this thing here?
So I think discussion, right? I think we have to let's get to a list of options that we think is manageable, because if we try to have a discussion about each option with those criteria, we'll be here for 2 years, right? So we need to refine the list of options, and some of them are just going to, we know the town, we know we know what the buildings are like. Some of them fall off the map pretty quickly, right? So I think, for example, having one big campus where we didn't have any substations, I don't think that that's likely a reasonable scenario given the geographic reach of our fire services, right? So there's no scenario where we just have, this is Judith speaking, not the committee, right? Just saying, I don't know that there's a place where we could put one large campus and effectively service the entire town. So that as an option, maybe falls off the map before we get into doing something super granular. So I would recommend that we streamline the options, then start to have a discussion, and we can use the evaluation criteria to guide our discussion. And by the way, there's a third mechanism for sorting. Because one of the issues with scoring, even if you do the 1 out of 5 kind of thing, or if you rank it, you will end up with a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of thing, unless the scores are exactly the same. Another way to do this is just say, high, medium, low. And it takes some of the specificity out of it, where we may not have enough data to be super specific. So we could just use even a check, a minus, or a neutral. There are lots of ways that we can make a matrix at this stage less determinative, I suppose, is the, sort of less political. So we can play around with them.
So I think that helps. So I just crossed my mind, and I wondering how we get there is, and that's the time function we have to have in mind. Yeah. So if you're looking at options 3 or 4, and I agree, it's option 5, and we should probably just take off the thing right from the get-go. But if you look at 3 or 4, no, can you go back oh yeah, whatever.
Sorry, Sven,
So
which one do you want?
we will need time to get there. You're not just getting a renovated or a new West Concord fire station tomorrow. So there's a time function between to realize options 3 or 4. So we need to have some understanding for option 1 is how long can we run option 1 while the other options like 3 or 4 are realized. So that's more or less the baseline, is like we do what we do so far until we have the solution in place. And what does it mean also with respect to cost or even short-term renovation that is needed to keep let's say, the Walden station running?
Yeah, I mean, I think in any scenario where we're building new, and particularly if we're building new on the same site, we have a service disruption issue. And so there needs to be a strategy where you're still able to provide services during a construction phase. And this is where building on a new site is often preferential to building on an existing site, particularly with fire and police services, because they're essential. And they're very, in the case of fire, it's difficult to just put them somewhere else for a couple of years. So that definitely falls under the project delivery criteria where you consider timing issues. I mean, I think that's a really important point, Sven, and we would have to evaluate the likelihood of being able to effectively deliver the projects based on not only the timing issue you just mentioned, but which one goes first. If you're doing two new builds, then which one goes first? So you have to think about phasing as well. So.
And then I'm confused out of this. At the one end, you say score out of 5 is 5 is best, and rank 5
So-
options is 1 is best.
So I said bowling and golfing, right? So if you're scoring, you're just saying like out of 5, would you say this is a 5 out of 5 where 5 is good? And then, or is it a terrible option on, is it super high cost, so it's a 1 out of 5 bad, or is it relatively low cost, so it's a 4 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5, right? So that's just simple, using
But you're taking a different order in the two things on this chart.
Well,
One,
yes, I'm saying that there are 2 different ways of doing it, and by the way, there's a third. And
and you only say, okay, you have to decide, but I thought is you want to switch the scoring.
No, I'm
between
just
the
saying
options.
you can score.
Sorry,
Yeah.
And
in
why do we
the ranking,
change the system?
in the ranking, low is good. In scoring, high is good, right? But also, it may be better for us to simply do check, or you can do plus, minus, or a dash, which is neutral, right? So there are lots of ways to do this. And I think each of the subgroups is going to be grappling with that particular issue of how to summarize and represent sort of the thinking.
Okay. So what do we do now? Now we have the framework, we have the options.
So I think we can talk about benchmarking. Do people want to chat about benchmarking?
Okay.
And I guess here in conversations with Brian and Brian, one of the things we were trying to figure out is, here, who are our peer municipalities, which largely seems to be neighboring ones, right? So it's like Acton, Maynard, Lexington, Bedford, et cetera. And of those, who has recently built a new station? And is it worthwhile for us as a committee to go and visit some of those stations with Brian and Brian, or any of the other, representatives of police and fire? So are there examples of what the newest and latest approaches to building design are that would resolve some of the problems at West Concord or at Walden that we could then use to better understand what a good outcome might be in Concord? So I think there's like the benchmarking and going and visiting. I think there's the benchmarking in terms of understanding the relationship between a headquarters and a substation. So I think we can learn that when we look at other places. And then, of course, there's benchmarking to size and cost. And so this, by the way, these are not my graphics. I just went looking for reports where people had been benchmarking fire stations. And by the way, these are fire stations largely, and I think in some cases they include a police component. But Brian Goldman, I just want you to know it wasn't that we were just looking at fire. It was just that I happened to find this report and it was a good example. So I just want you to know that we're thinking of police and fire as well. But in this report, and it's actually super helpful because I was looking at each one and trying to write down how big it was, how many bays it had, how many acres it needed to sit on the site. But this actually brings a lot of them together. This one wasn't. So we've got these one. I think I had a little shift here with the slide because Lexington should be highlighted in West Natick and not Yonkers and Bedford Village in New York. But down here you can see we've got Hyannis, Mansfield, Nantucket, Needham, North Acton. Some of these are main stations or headquarters. And I think we have to find terminology, by the way, because I'm not sure if it's typically called a headquarters and then a sub or how they call them. But some of these are smaller, like the North Acton station that was built in 2021. That is I think it's just a small 2-bay in North Acton that is in conjunction with their bigger station on 27. So what we have here is we have the completion year, and that's a 6-year window. That's something we can use inflation to adjust from. Cost of the station, area of the building, cost per square foot. And then this is the year they were assuming that it was completed in 2024 for the purposes of adjusting the building costs for inflation. So, for example, something that was built in 2023 might have priced at 651 a square feet, but then if you use an inflation adjustment, and the inflation adjustment in construction over the last few years, as many of you know, has been pretty high. So we're looking at 651 to maybe 703. Okay. And then when we get to the next page, we've got some are bigger, like Quincy, Brockton. Some of these are obviously quite big, and we get into some really big costs, like Quincy, they have a $100 million station. But we also have some of the smaller ones in this lower set as well. And again, you just get a sense of bigger buildings, smaller buildings. And then the most useful piece of information, I think, is that in 2024, for the purposes of our benchmarking, a new fire station was running at about 740 a square foot. And I would expect that that has increased substantially, not only because of inflation, but also because of tariffs on building materials. And then keeping in mind that when we look at the cost per square foot, these often don't include soft costs. So there's some design work, et cetera, that isn't included in here. That can be, just for the sake of ballparking, 25%. And then also prevailing wage law, when you're, when you are building a public building, you get into prevailing wage law, which tends to increase your labor cost relative to the delivery of a project in the private sector. So there are things that bump that cost up. But in general, I'd say, new fire only headquarters, you're looking between 30 and 40 million for a headquarters, and for a sub, maybe 10, 15 for a sub that only has living area, that would be sort of the same size as West Concord. So not perfect data, but certainly before we go out to a consultant to ask them to start pricing, a prospective set of options, these are some basic and useful numbers. So that's what I had on benchmark.
And that does not include, just to be clear, if we have to acquire additional lots.
Doesn't include, the land. Yeah, thanks.
The land is not included in that. Yeah. Okay.
So I can stop sharing now if people just want to chat now as opposed
Now,
to...
just let it hang for a minute. So it's interesting that there are some outliers in both directions in a per square footage, saying I'm just trying to figure out, is there a pattern between that?
So I think the pattern is, I'm looking at the note at the bottom, Sven, and there were more notes, by the way. I just did a screenshot, but it seems like, abnormal cost data, which I would expect is likely to do with either land acquisition, site preparation, or as it says here, if you have an environmentally tricky site, right? So that might be bumping up the cost quite significantly if, for example, they had drainage issues, or if it was a former gas station or something that they had to deal with cleaning up the site.
Okay. And then I see net carbon zero design.
Oh, yeah.
So knowing Concord. So we might have to cite in our guesstimate what we are at the moment. I think that's the guesstimate. We probably have to cite more on the higher side of the potential cost. Because that's the usual push you get here in Concord.
Yeah. I think that's where benchmark, like this is different from just trying to get a sense of cost numbers, is different from actually benchmarking our neighborhood peers. And this is where I really think that if Brian and Brian are willing to help us arrange a couple of visits I think we could really begin to understand what it is that a new building could offer, particularly from a service functionality point of view. I mean, I know that I can go to the Walden Street campus and I understand that the hallways are dark and the HVAC isn't great, and that the staff break room in particular is not a pleasant place to take a break. I think we can all understand that a new building will solve those problems, but I think better understanding the functionality improvement associated with newer designs and in particular the impact on site geometry, because it's, for a fire station, it's a one-story building for it. In the sense of service delivery issues, right? Your bays and stuff, it's one story. So how do we think about backing trucks in and out versus having potentially a loop where, where they can come in, sort of go around the site and they can pull a fire truck in without having to reverse in and those sorts of things. So there's a site geometry aspect that I'd like to look at when we go and look at our neighbors as well. Oh, and the last thing, and I don't mean to speak for Brian because obviously he's the pro here, but when we were visiting the West Concord site, we were talking about how the fire staff, and I think the police staff as well, could really benefit from having some outdoor surface area that they could utilize for training. And, obviously that can swing to parking, but it could also provide them with some capacity that they don't currently have at either site, which also feeds into site size and site geometry, and can they do the things that they need to do. So we would love to see some examples of what that looks like where it's present in other neighboring towns.
So what again, remind me on what are we assuming on the other work streams? For example, if you would have to build a new office for municipal, just
Just
standard
ballpark?
office. Yeah, so are we going in with a per square foot price there?
Yeah. So, I mean, and I'm happy to, I'm happy to call these Judas numbers so that, and we can say that they correspond to conversations that we've had with folks in the industry. But we're using 400 to 600 a square foot for renovation. Keeping in mind that the 400 level would be more like carpets and lighting and, et cetera. And the 600 per square foot is when you start moving walls. So if we were trying to price renovation at Walden, it would definitely be at the higher end of that range. If we were talking about new construction for an office building, I think, 800 to 1,000 a square foot is probably accurate. And again, level of amenity might drive the difference there. And those numbers, by the way, are a little bit higher than they would have been, a year and a half ago. I would have said 800, but because of inflation and tariffs, I think it's a little bit higher. Which, by the way, for all of our working groups is going to beg the question of, if we sit it out for 3 or 4 years, are we going to be able to experience a cost savings, if we anticipate some of the tariffs being dismantled, right? So I think there's a
Well,
broader
you have then you have to wait until the end.
exactly, right.
Mark has your hand up.
Judith, have you mentioned the Prevailing Wage Act and you mentioned some other things. Is there a scenario where, and I don't know if it would fit squarely in this moniker, but is there a private public scenario where private developers acquire, develop, build, and then lease that over a long period of time to a town or municipality?
So great question, because that, of course, is like the main work that I do, is structuring public-private partnerships. And I would say I'm not an expert in public safety, right? So I'm learning a lot about public safety at the same time, I think, as we all are. My sense is from reviewing projects that for public safety, that's not common, at least in Massachusetts. I could be wrong, but when I'm just reading case studies and looking at examples, I'm finding that these are more typically solely publicly procured buildings. I don't really know if there's a rationale for that. Certainly in municipal office buildings, there's a little bit more of an example. There are more examples of doing a design, build, operate kind of model that provides some substantial, savings, at least, in terms of in terms of capital expenses, upfront capital expenses, right? So it can be a significant savings, but I'm not seeing it in public safety. And I don't know if that has to do with the notion that it can be very difficult to position private ownership of what are considered to be essential public services, right? And I wonder if this falls into that category. I mean, I'm sure the public works folks have confronted this question because there's lots of states playing around with private ownership of, say, wastewater treatment facilities and then leasing back into the community. And I know, following some examples in Pennsylvania, for example, where they recently introduced a new law to encourage public-private partnerships around wastewater, around public works issues, there's been a lot of political blowback and issues around that. And so they're having challenges with that implementation model. So I don't know, Mark, that's a very long-winded way of saying, I don't know, I'm not seeing it, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, the only follow-up is I don't have the data, but again, you start talking about $600, $700, $800 a foot. That just won't fly in the private sector. It just, so, we've seen it in the schools where, the expense of carbon neutral and a whole sort of, prevailing wage, et cetera, add on, I don't know what the number is, 20, 30%. We're talking about $100 million spend maybe with a couple buildings. You're talking about a $30 million savings. I think at some point the town is going to face the reality of someone's got to pay for this stuff. And, at some point we need to start sharpening our pencils rather than going down this road of doing things the way we have in the past. And so, I just throw it out there as, maybe there are scenarios where, the private public partnership type of model may achieve some savings for the town that the town desperately needs, candidly.
Well, great. I mean, Mark, if you could look into that a little bit more and see if you can find some examples in the public safety realm, I think we'd certainly be willing to engage them and talk about them. I know I'd be interested. As I said, I just wasn't seeing it where I was looking, but I might not have just been looking in the right places.
Ryan.
The audio off. Yeah, just on that, the one that I believe might be, and it may not be the best equivalent to Concord is Boston. I believe they have a station, Engine 10 on High Street. I believe that station was built, and I don't know if it's leased, what the deal is, but I believe that's a that's the only one I can think of in the state, but that is potentially a private, what Mark was describing, a private developer, and the bottom couple floors were, it's in an area that's a high rise. So that's why it's probably not the most comparable to Concord, but that might be a starting point for discussion anyway, if I'm correct with that, and what they did to address that.
Yeah, and I also, when I think about the former Concord Oil site not selling, when you start thinking about, some private owners around West Concord, I mean, the reality is that given the scarceness of available land in Concord, we may have to be a little bit more creative, and we may have to sort of engage the private sector, if you will, because they own the land, or there are entities out there who can acquire the land, for the right long-term situation.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, I think is most likely when we do our comparison of the options, we will have probably the biggest discussions around the financial angle here. So I think it's a good idea to start thinking outside the box. Yes, to Mark's point, it's hard to add another 100 million on top of what we have so far. And of course, time plays a role, but we have to have in mind that the debt on the middle school is structured as a as a flat payment, so it's no ramping down. So that gives us what now 28, 27-year window where the debt service cost of the town is not going down. And that might guide our recommendations to the select board with respect to which options and which timing, and that goes across all three work streams, I think. If you look at the consolidation, if you look at public works, therefore, I think in all three, inclusive this one, we need to understand the status quo very well to see is which timelines can we max out to push as much as possible potential debt down the road. But that drives, again, with an 8% escalation rate, that drives our costs up. So are we gaining, how much are we gaining by pushing out? And how much liability we are building up by pushing out. So that will be a very interesting discussion on the financial side. So Judith, as you are the master of the process on what we're doing, so how do we, so now we have all of this, we have the options, we have a metrics. We have on the agenda another kind of 19 minutes. So how do we take it from here?
Can I invoke the Mark clause and choose not to be the master? I would like to, you know, hand that
So,
off.
so
Being the creator of the Mark clause, you know, Sven, I think that, you know, based on the two Brians, and I just think if we go back to sort of in Judith's point of, you know, we have a pretty short window, you know, call it a year.
Yes.
And I think we need to be efficient. And so I wonder if there's low-hanging fruit we could just start knocking off the table. So for me, you know, like option one, renovation, just doesn't sound like it's going to work. Just get rid of it. I mean, I'm wondering, Judith, is there, you know, status quo, you know, I'm not even sure that's an option. But you know, I'm wondering if we go to, I think what Judith was talking about, you know, I don't remember when exactly, but if we go to sort of what our mission is of this subgroup fitting into the larger group, fitting into the report, and then trying to streamline that process to make sort of very sort of streamlined progress. For me, I would like to go visit Bedford. I'd like to go visit, you know, maybe Acton. I'd like to go visit Maynard, wherever the most sort of proximate new builds are. I still think a peer analysis is important, so I'd like to understand what those towns went through as far as scoping, you know, getting support, getting funding, et cetera. I don't think the state of the feds will be particularly helpful, but I might be pleasantly surprised. But for me, I think it's one of those, the town is in a very painful situation where status quo is not an option. It's sort of like the middle school. I mean, yes, you can argue you could have kept Peabody and Sanborn, but the reality is you really couldn't. And if you go to the middle school, it's great. It's so nice to have everyone on one campus. And I think that's a good example of, yes, it was very painful for some, but really was a very good outcome. So for next steps, I'd love to tour. I'd love to get more data on some of our peers. I'd love for peer analysis to be a part of our recommendation. I'd like to prioritize. So for me, I'm still not quite sure whether police is more urgent than fire. Maybe they're the same urgency. I don't know. I think what Judith did, you know, early this morning's great. And I'm just wondering how to sort of streamline and build on top of it.
I tend to agree. Renovate. I think we can knock off renovate both. The West Concord side, in a funny way, because they had a fire, it was somehow renovated. So there's not much more you can gain out of that thing in the first place. And we know how it looks on the other. So I agree, we can knock off renovate both. We can knock off build central campus. I don't see how that works from a service perspective and where to find the campus in the first place. So that brings us to the variations of 3 and 4. The only thing we have to understand on status quo is, as said, is the timeline is depending on the timeline of 3 or 4. Are we running into any surprises on the status quo while we are implementing 3 and 4? So in a certain way, we have to have an understanding of the status quo. And you always have to, because this is the standard questions you face from FinCom, is why aren't we just continuing what we are doing, and pushing that out for another 10 years? This will be the first question we will face. So we will have to have an answer on the status quo.
Well, I think circling back to what I sort of tried to stress at the beginning of the meeting, I feel as though, when Brian Goldman was talking about, hey, we don't have the cell block space, or we don't have, I forget what else sort of wrote down, we can't do our job functionally. Those are things that I hadn't heard before, probably my fault, but Brian, if you and Tom can come up with your pitch. For me, the pitch is, it's broken. Yes, we're getting by, but the state's auditing us. We're not passing. If we sent over an inspector, Brian, I'm not sure that building passes code as private folks like would understand it. So I wish there were more folks from the public on this call, because I think there is a disconnect as to the urgency of needing to move. And if I have it wrong, hopefully I have it wrong, but I think we need to just, so for me, I agree with you, Sven, as far as I don't think status quo works. We can band-aid it for a while, we can patch it up. Renovate both, I don't think works, because I just think Walden's the wrong spot. I think it has sort of issues that we can't change, unfortunately. I do think it's upon the two departments, fire and police, to really do almost a pitch to this. Here's why it's broken. Here's why it has to be fixed, and here's how to fix it. And I would love to have tours. Look at Bedford. I mean, Bedford, literally, I can't believe how large the lot they created, or they're building upon, right in their, historic district of Bedford. I'd love to see the plans of that facility. I'd love to see how, HDC in Bedford worked. I'd love to see the cost there. Not that we have to be like Bedford, but I do, as a parent, go to a lot of neighboring towns, and I walk in, I say, holy smokes, look at how nice this school is, or look at that brand new fire department. And I sort of scratch my head saying, we in Concord should be able to sort of pick and choose, sort of where we choose to spend our money on really providing sort of top tier facilities for our public safety people, which, maybe I'm wrong, but Brian, chime in, but I think everyone takes it for granted, right? Everyone takes the police for granted. Everyone takes the fire for granted till it comes to them, till they have an elderly person who maybe has a condition, or, maybe there's, vandalism or a theft, and then people care. So I'm just wondering how we wrap this all up into, hey, we're not trying to get anyone concerned, but too much, but we got to take this stuff seriously, because I think the Concord, my sense is people will just want to kick it down the road, and I don't think both of these departments can be kicked down the road at this point.
Yeah, I conceptually agree, Mark. So what I hear is we want to have tours from neighboring that are ideally something that is comparable to what we want to do here and address here. So that's one. We So Judith, you have to chime in if we kick out option 2 and kick option 5. So we have to close that loop. And again, I think it's just to be able to answer questions. What does it mean to kick the can down the road? We have to look at status quo. Most likely the con list is super long and the pro list is super short, and answer it in the end by itself. But that's jumping to a conclusion, but just seeing what we all saw and knowing what you all know, that most likely will be the outcome of the status quo option. So, and then on what we need on 3 and 4, I think we have to put, because that's a budget item for our budget on things, we have to do that Peabody equivalent thinking or analysis of the Walden building to understand is that an option at all to renovate, or are we sinking so much money into something that it's better to build all new? Yeah,
The only thing I would say, Sven, is I'm not sure I'm in agreement with you to throw out 5 quite yet, because
okay.
So for example, if we take Junction Village, or if we take Kai's Road, or if we take look, we acquire the Concord Oil facility, if you will. Much like MCI is not going to be developed in one step. MCI is going to develop over many years on various steps, just the way Maynard has done Maynard Crossing. So maybe there's a scenario where we say, all right, and I'm just picking on Junction Village. We'll acquire Junction Village and we'll do the police in phase 1.
So Junction Village is getting accelerated. That's
He's getting what?
That is getting accelerated. It will now be back on a faster path than MCI, and the town doesn't own it. You know that. So you have to acquire it back, and then you have to argue whether you swap affordable housing somewhere else.
Yes,
So
I'm still not totally understanding how Junction Village fits with MCI. I've heard it fits with it. I've heard it's part of it. I don't know.
yeah, but I think let's say it's okay to mention it as a potential lot. I think that is the most unlikely lot, because I don't know how to get this done.
I mean, the only thing I would just say in opposition to that, Sven, is if we start to do any sort of expansion of the wastewater facility, I think the reality is that municipal use and potential industrial are the most logical uses to put next to an expanded wastewater treatment facility, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, it would not expand. So the only thing that expands downward, just to be knowing what I know on the public works side, is so the sand beds are the only thing that will be used on the towards the south of the water facility, and that will be most likely green space on top of it, where you can put some kind of recreation stuff, even a sport field you could put on. You would not put buildings on the sand beds, because that it's used for the wastewater stuff. So that is more kind of really a recreational, nice green space that sits there towards Junction Village. So again, it's not town property, so that would fall into acquiring it, and Junction
But Sven,
Village.
when you say
Yeah.
it's not town property, I'm not sure I understand. And I've asked Keith, who owns it?
What's we have
I mean,
Isn't it the Concord Housing Development Corporation?
yeah, exactly.
okay, but who owns that?
Well, they own itself.
I know, but nothing owns itself. What do you mean it owns
Well,
it?
it's self-perpetuating organizations. That's in that sense. It's not they regulate it itself. So they own it. So the town needs to buy it back from them. And then you will have big discussion, and we can have that. It's not that I'm just saying what you will face is where do you put affordable housing? They're planning there. And they're right now, what I heard in the last 2 weeks, it was put on hold because of MCI. Now they try to accelerate that. And saying MCI will take forever. Let's start with the affordable housing on this. So it's
But
a
when you say
side.
let's start, Sven, I mean, it's just, so it's, again, I still I really don't understand it. So my understanding is they were given it, correct? They didn't pay for it.
Okay.
So I just don't understand.
We
At
can
some
put it.
point, there was
I'm
a
not an
town-
expert on the three different housing organizations we have and all the complexity around it. I have no, this is highly complex.
Okay.
We can put it on a list of potential lots to acquire and then figure out what does it mean if we wanted to acquire it? What is the process to do it?
Okay. Yeah, and again, one of the things was, I was thinking about is that, if you take Junction Village just as an example, can you trade it for Kai's Road? Can you trade it for Peabody? Is there a trade to be made if this group thinks that that location is a superior location to other potential locations?
So can I make a suggestion? I think
Yeah.
this is a great conversation, but I know I have a hard stop in about 5 minutes. So what I'd like to suggest is that in terms of next steps for the committee, we work with the two Bryans to get a better sense of our peer sort of peer municipalities and which stations they would like to either see or they've heard are really interesting. And then scheduling those visits is going to be tricky. Sven and Mark and I are all still working. The Bryans obviously are working, and it's been difficult enough just to set meetings. So there would have to be a pretty strong commitment to making windows of time available over the next couple of months to get that done. So I want to say it's one thing to say, let's do it. It's another thing to schedule it. So people would have to really make an effort to clear certain windows in their calendar so that we can actually get this done, right? So that's number one. Number two is I think I've heard enough ideas that what I could do is come back to the next meeting with an expanded list of options that would include all of these different parcels. And then we could continue, because I think these discussions are really valuable. We could continue to have discussions and deliberations about these options. And if anybody has an idea, just send it to Shannon and she can forward it to me. And then I'll also try to get more data together on some of these sites, like Concord Oil and the site on Walden, Sven, et cetera. So that's number two. So number one is benchmarking and timing. Number two is really like let's blow up the list of options, right? Like in terms of alternative sites. And then number three is I think we need to get a read on Walden because it's new information to me. I think as Sven is pointing out that we have a Peabody-esque situation where I was assuming that Walden was renovatable. Obviously on the higher end because there's configuration issues as well as just material and interior sort of interior amenity issues. But if I'm hearing that there are broader structural concerns that would not make the building a good candidate for renovation, we need to figure that out sooner rather than later so that we can eliminate it from the list. But if we eliminate it from the list, we do so with some good information. So those are the three things I would like to put on our next steps list.
Okay, sounds like a plan. We have 1 minute left, so Brian Goldman.
So real quick, I will meet with Brian next week. We will come up with a list of locations for site visits. I think that will be helpful, and then we can start trying to find dates. But the one point I want to make with Walden Street, and it's very quick. We have an HVAC system that controls that building that is being held together, I think it's safe to say, with Band-Aids and glue. That needs to probably be replaced at some point in time if there's any renovations. And that's just one area of the building that's failing. So when I hear renovations of Walden Street, short of a complete knockdown and rebuild on that site, I don't think it's feasible. I think it'll cost too much money.
Yeah, that's what we have to figure out. I think is we need that information, and then if we have that, then it's easier to point to something than, let's say, us three here in this saying we feel like that, so we can't make a decision on feeling, not
Right.
not to what if you talk about this amount of dollars. Okay, I want to just fast track here. I think we have a plan going forward. Um, Public comments anywhere? None. I think is we will synchronize between Mark, Judith, and myself the date of the next meeting, or do we have already one? No. So let's synchronize on that. And we also then synchronize on tours. I would, if there's nothing else from Judith, Mark, no, I would adjourn the meeting at 10:31 a.m. Yeah, thank you, everyone.